Good morning. It's a pleasure to have everybody joining us. I can see participants arriving, and we've got a great international audience with us this morning. So I want to welcome you all to this webinar, which turns the spotlight onto innovation in various forms of protein. And the webinar is brought to you this morning jointly by AHFES, which is an Interreg project supporting SMEs to bring healthy foods to market. The ValuSect project, which is an Interreg Northwest Europe project looking at insects in the food chain, and the Nutri-Wales cluster, which is part of Food and Drink Wales. My name is Alison Haselgrove, and I'm the project manager for the AHFES project here in Wales. And my background is in food retailing and manufacturing. And I'm joined by my colleague, Natalie Rouse, who brings her extensive knowledge as a nutritionist and researcher to today's presentation. We have a lot of information to share with you this morning, which I hope you will enjoy. And just so you know, you don't have to take notes as we go. This video is being recorded and will be made available on the AHFES project website for your future reference, along with the slides. If you have any questions, please use the chat or the Q&A functions, whichever is your preference, to make contact with us. So let's get started. And first of all, I'm going to hand over to Natalie, who is going to give us a brief reminder of why protein is such an important component of the human diet.
Thank you very much, Alison. Good morning, everyone. So just kind of putting it into a context within the trends, protein has remained at the forefront for a good number of years, and it hasn't dipped at all. But as we're seeing with protein now, it comes in all shapes and forms. So we're looking at plant-based, animal-based, and new and emerging proteins. Also, it hasn't gone out of favour with the consumer. We'll go on to that a little bit later. And there's various reasons of why. Also, there's a higher need in the ageing population. So again, there's plenty of areas to tap into to really make sure that you're making meaningful and healthful products for the future. If we pop on to the next slide. So protein itself is made up of molecules called amino acids, and these then bond into chains to make polypeptide chains and then make larger structures. Each chain has a different sequence, and those different sequences have different outcomes. So again, they're used for different biological processes. Occasionally we think that protein is generally just for muscle tissue, and we just see it as something perhaps for active consumers, but actually it's used in every single process of the body. If we just move on to the next slide. So just to kind of hint on a few of the areas that the protein works with. So it does work with our contractile proteins, so again, within our muscle movement for contraction, but also through transport. So looking at hemoglobin, so red blood cells, different enzymes to break down and uptake of the nutrients that we eat, DNA-associated proteins, signaling proteins, structurals, again, collagen is a big trend going forward, antibodies, different cell membranes, hormonal proteins, and also as an energy source. Now, it's not a great energy source. The body doesn't prefer it. It much prefers glucose or carbohydrate intake. But at times of need, you can begin to break down your protein stores from muscle and use it as an energy source, but it's not a preferred source of the body. On to next slide. So with the amino acids, there's 20 different amino acids. Almost all of them are required for the body. So essentially, they're all essential. There are 11 non-essential. This means that providing that you have a balanced diet and a complete diet, your body can make the non-essential amino acids and synthesize themselves. Now, the 9 essential amino acids must come from the daily diet, so that's why they're really, really important. And of those of those 9, 3 of them are branched-chain amino acids, or known as BCAAs. That's leucine, isoleucine, and the valine. And they are particularly important, particularly again in athletic or older populations, as they are known to have the strongest amount of muscle protein synthesis. So again, if you're looking to build up muscle or just maintain muscle, they're absolutely essential. Not only that, but you need to be having them in the right requirements. This is why it's really important to have different sources of protein in your daily diet, and why having one source wouldn't be beneficial. And the human body, if we were to break it down, is about 20% and made up of amino acids, and the most you'll find is glutamine. So glutamine is really what kind of muscle bodies are made up of. So on to the next slide. So just as a little bit of an overview, so again, we'll share this, so please feel free to dig a little bit deeper. But when we come to different proteins, whether it's plant-based or animal-based proteins, you can really see that there is a differing amount of amino acids within there. So this is looking at 8 of the essential amino acids. From these, the ones that have very, very low levels are called limiting amino acids or incomplete. That doesn't mean that they're particularly bad, but it does mean that you'd be looking to combine different protein sources. So within say whey or casein that we see in dairy proteins, fully complete, very, very good for muscle protein synthesis and looking after muscle tissue. If you're looking at plant-based proteins, you may then wish to combine things like pea and rice, as they have complementary proteins, as what the one is lacking, the other one is a little bit higher in. On to the next slide. So again, just a little bit of a protein intake. Now, this has recently been changed a little bit. Now, protein itself is an appetite suppressant. So that's why it sometimes becomes very beneficial with people that are perhaps looking to limit their dietary intake. It also slows gastric emptying. They're very good for just reducing your glucose response after you've eaten a meal. There's 4 calories per gram, which is the same as carbohydrates, but that's half of what we're seeing in fats. And protein has a much higher postprandial thermogenic effect. So that means that once you eat it, it heats you up, and often you kind of get the meat sweats or something like that after you've had a large meal. So it does actually bring up the body temperature, which again helps to burn more calories. Again, it really brings that kind of association why protein has been so prominent in consumer choices. Within the UK, adults are recommended to eat about 0 grams of protein per kilogram of body weight, but that has also been increased slightly. So much more current thoughts are beginning to think that it should perhaps be about 1 gram per kilo of body weight. And for people who are looking to perhaps increase their muscle mass, could even go up to about as high as 1.6. The largest population who need a higher protein intake are the older generation, and really we're looking there that they should be having about 1.2, and this generally is to kind of navigate digestive decline. So it's really important that that protein intake is increased, but also is bioavailable in the older adult. On to the next. So with this one, the importance of protein is maintaining health, and it's becoming more well known to consumers. So are many seeking to increase their protein intake, so we're really seeing that as a high demand. This is even the case in countries where the majority of consumers are already eating and consuming adequate levels of protein. Within the UK and also across Europe, you generally don't see protein malnutrition, but we are seeing the benefits of having a higher protein diet, hence why it's becoming much more popular. And this desire is driving innovation and investment in protein and across the protein industries, and enhancing foods and new protein sources and very much a fortified and enriched food product. On to the next slide. So as we've touched on before, protein generally has a very positive image within consumers, and this generally is due to its appetite suppressants. It keeps high of your muscle levels. It has a very aesthetic and inspiring intake. It also comes in lots of different shapes and sizes and very appealing formats that are new and very exciting. I'm now going to hand over to Ali to take you on to the first section. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Natalie. So in the past, different cultures have obtained their protein from different sources based on what they have access to in their particular location and their religious and cultural beliefs. In recent decades, here in Western Europe, obtaining protein needed for a healthy body has come from livestock animals, which are specifically reared to provide meat or dairy or eggs from fish or from plants, especially legumes, nuts and seeds. In other parts of the world, eating insects and seaweed as protein sources is well established. Within the last decade, there has been an acceleration of interest in widening the materials from which dietary protein is created. And specifically, this has been to increase the options for plant-based proteins, explore the scope of proteins from algae and other sea crops, and to seek ways for insects to be scalable food source in Europe. In addition, there has been a significant increase in investment to achieving large-scale production of meat and fish created through so-called CleanTech cellular agriculture. And we're going to look at all of these areas in turn today. So moving on, I do just want to put all of this demand for alternative proteins into context. A recent global survey by Statista shows that meat eating is still an average, well established and very much the norm for many countries, with an average of 86% of consumers including meat in their diet across the 39 countries they survived. And for those interested in the AHFES projects, these include all of the countries taking part in the project. This has led to a 2020 figure of around 330 million tonnes of meat still being produced worldwide. However, as we shall see, consumers are now increasingly looking to include non-meat proteins in their everyday diets. Okay, moving on. So we're looking at these insights from Euromonitor. They show the change that is happening across consumers worldwide. But it's the 18 to 29-year-old age group that is proportionally more likely to be following meat-free diets. And on the next slide, we can see that the research compared the consumer preferences for where their protein intake is going to come from, and looking at 2021 versus 2019. And this shows a decline in fresh meat and fish, and to a lesser extent in chicken, whereas plant-based meat substitutes and tofu are now featuring on the graph for the first time. So moving on and looking at this holistically, this increasing consumer demand for more diverse protein sources is driving innovation as manufacturers of food and drink products, ingredient suppliers, and science and technology-led businesses see opportunities to grow sales and enhance profits. Key consumer motivations include health and concerns about the negative impacts of food production and agriculture on the environment and climate change. And as affluence is rising in developing countries, the desire of populations to enjoy protein-rich diets increases, and innovation in affordable and sustainable protein supply chains is looking to service this demand in an ever-increasing world population. So Euromonitor's survey also shows us a strong bias towards health motivations for plant-based diet choices, with over 35% of consumers saying that they want plant-based products to make them feel healthier. It would seem that to enjoy repeat sales, innovative products entering this sector need to deliver against this desire to feel healthy here and now. 25% of consumers are willing to choose plant-based products in the expectation of longer-term benefits, suggesting that to be credible, product innovation needs to be able to demonstrate how this will be achieved. The importance of these products being delicious is also highlighted here, as this features more highly than the more altruistic motions of improving the environmental and animal welfare. So on the next slide, we can see that within this context, protein in particular enjoys a positive reputation with consumers that it can deliver numerous positive health outcomes. However, the wider debate around climate change is gathering momentum, and consumers are now regularly presented with information highlighting the role of food production and consumer diet choices that could have on halting global warming. Businesses operating in this sector can expect consumers to be increasingly aware of these issues and demanding proactive approaches from the brands that they choose to support. In particular, the concept of the climatarian diet is now also being more widely promoted, with consumers being increasingly presented with information and options on how they can pursue such a climatarian diet. Brands who can demonstrate how their products deliver for the climatarian customer should be able to enjoy sales driven by these growing areas of demand. Looking at meat and poultry, these have been identified as contributing relatively high levels of greenhouse gases per kilo of protein consumed when compared to plant-based foods. Now, meat producers in various European countries, including the UK and Ireland, are able to prove lower levels of emission than the global average. But even so, these are higher than for plant proteins. Therefore, eating more plant-based foods is being promoted as ways in which consumers can take direct action to reduce their own personal carbon impacts. For example, the World Wildlife Fund are promoting their so-called Live Well diet. So the contribution that producing plant-based brands can make towards corporate net zero pledges is another motivating factor driving innovation, in fact, in companies of all sizes. And at a multinational level, for example, we see Unilever with their Future Foods plan setting an annual budget of €1 billion sales as a target for plant-based meat and dairy alternatives. And a company like Nestle, who have assigned 10% of their R&D employees to working on developing plant-based foods. However, on the next slide, we can see that the meat industry is also responding to this criticism that is focused on them in respect of climate change impacts. The UN Food and Agriculture Organization is forecasting that by 2025, meat consumption will still average 35.5 kilos per person per annum. And they point out that due to animal farming being so entrenched widespread on a global basis, that if we can reduce the greenhouse gas emissions within livestock management, this will have a far greater effect than trying to convert everyone to a plant-based diet. And this is leading to initiatives around the world with government organizations, NGOs, farming organizations, academics, and businesses collaborating to address these issues. So here we are seeing innovation in new breeding programs, innovations in feed management, in the management of the livestock themselves, and a range of regenerative farming techniques being brought into practice. Moving on, in 2018, Protein XTC's Global Innovation reported that 6% of all the innovation in food worldwide originated from the meat sector. Now, the sector regularly launches seasonal product updates with key launches for summer and barbecue eating and comforting autumn and winter meals and Christmas indulgences. But these are increasingly being joined by innovation addressing the consumer concerns that we've been talking about. For example, removing nitrates from cured meat products to reduce the risk of carcinogenic effects, reducing environmental impacts with lightweighting packaging and ensuring that packaging is more easily recyclable. But also the industry is working hard to point out that meat provides a nutrient-dense source of protein, which can form an important constituent within a balanced diet. Looking now at the fish, seafood and dairy innovation, we can see that innovation is driving change in these other areas of animal-based proteins. For example, many of the innovations within the fish supply chain are focusing on proving the sustainability of both aquaculture-based fish and seafood production, and also wild-caught fish being more sustainable. Product innovation is focusing on making fish easy to prepare and consume, from tray bakes to on-the-go eating formats and snacking for humans and even for our pets. And looking at the award schemes that are a vehicle for manufacturers to publicise their innovation, there are many of these within the dairy sector, for example. So this new award from the International Dairy Federation are bringing out this autumn is a platform in which businesses are encouraged to celebrate innovative practices across the dairy sector and demonstrate how they contribute to the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. So as well as addressing sustainability through new dairy production methods and seeking B Corp accreditation, product innovations include more on-the-go formats, increasing protein and fibre contents, reduction of sugar, managing calorie contexts, and bringing dairy traditions from around the world to new audiences. However, we're now going to move on and look specifically at the first of the new protein areas, which is plant-based proteins. And this sector has had a lot of sales and innovation in the last 3 to 4 years, and we're going to look at some of the key drivers of this. So the recent Euromonitor report shows a growing consumer interest in plant-based foods, even if consumers don't necessarily say that they identify themselves as following any of these particular flexitarian or vegetarian or vegan diets. So looking at the next slide, we can see evidence of an explosion of product launches across these sectors, and they target a number of different usage and eating occasions. So we're going to have a look at some of these in a little more detail. So, for example, in the meat replacement sector, retailers, discounters, and food service menus are all now featuring an ever-widening range of products that fulfill a centre of plate role for replacing the traditional meat or fish. This includes many styles of minced and formed products that we're familiar with, along with breading and coating, and increasingly substitutes for meat portions such as chopped steaks and fillets. One area with significant increase in launches for products is those that mimic fish. And this has started mainly as replacement for breaded and coated formats, but now innovation is seeking to replace more plain fish portions and slices. And new brands are investing heavily in this sector. The dairy alternative sector is well established with plain milk alternatives, widely stocked in retail and food service. But within this market, there is innovation in the substrate from which these liquids are being derived, as well as formats including yogurts, ice creams, desserts, and particularly cheese. Plant-based egg alternatives have been slower to find acceptable formats and traction in the market, but there is now considerable activity worldwide in this sector. And in addition, the plant-based protein movement is pitching itself to consumers who feel that they would like to follow a lower carbohydrate diet, which would benefit their weight, their blood sugar, and their gut health. So we're seeing innovation in noodles, pasta, rice, etc. And the carb sector is also looking at the route of adding plant-based protein into breads and other bakery items. And the positioning of these products may also be teaming this protein booth with demonstrating how they can help consumers increase their fibre intakes, which is another positive health goal. So looking now at the work that has been done by the Pan-European Smart Protein Project, and this project reviewed the trends in plant-based protein in 11 European markets. And they identified the substantial growth between 2018 and 2020 that the markets in many countries have enjoyed. And they particularly identified the fact that plant-based proteins are now being extensively listed within the discount retail sector, which is driving demand. So what I have done on the next few slides is to analyze their data and to try and put it in a more user-friendly format for you if you are a business that's looking to trade internationally. And you can see on this initial slide that where we're looking at the value of plant-based foods, the relative performance of the different markets which the study looked at. We can see that all of the countries except Italy were in growth in this 2-year period, and some markets such as Germany and the UK have shown dramatic rises in sales values. Looking next at the value of plant-based foods, we can see this is coming off very different sizes of markets. For example, Germany and UK are very large markets and in high growth, whilst Poland is growing very rapidly, but from a much lower base. And whilst Italy did not show growth in this period, it is still a relatively large market. Looking next at volume, we can see that Spain steps into second place, perhaps indicating a slightly lower unit price for products in the sector than the UK. And we'll have a look at why this might be in a moment. And the same observation can be made for France, which sits at number 5 for volume, but number 9 for value. And we can see that this is being driven by the nature of the products popular in each market. So this next slide, I've tried to demonstrate the Smart Protein split the markets for plant-based products into 2 main categories, being milk alternatives and meat alternatives. And you can see that there are some quite dramatic differences across the markets. For example, plant-based meat dominates in the Netherlands and the UK, whereas in Spain and France, the opposite of true, and the milk alternatives category significantly outperforms the plant-based meat options. And this may well explain the higher volume to value ratios that we spoke about earlier. As you can see in a new market such as Poland, milk is doing the pioneering work, and there isn't a meat alternative that was showing in the 18 to 20 time span. So just wanted to check whether this is actually being maintained, and the latest figures that we have from Euromonitor do demonstrate that this growth was maintained throughout 2021, and we can still see products coming to launch as we move into 2022. Looking now at some of the plant-based proteins, these are a number of the proteins that you'll be well familiar with as they are well established, but we're still seeing a lot of innovation in how they can be used to create foods, products, and a lot of deeper research into their nutritional benefits. Some proteins such as soy, almond, rice, oat, and coconut are well known in the dairy and sports nutrition sectors, but new formats with greater functionality are coming through from the ingredient suppliers and allowing them to move more into meal centres, into snacking, desserts, and a whole range of food products. Looking at the next slide, we can see that there are a number of areas of emerging proteins, and nutritionists have been suggesting that these products could form a good source of protein for someone following a plant-based diet, but many of them have not become mainstream. And this has often been because of the ability to obtain them in a format that is able to be processed easily. But because we've seen such a growth in the plant-based foods, the ingredients manufacturers are now motivated into innovating these newer products into formats that can be more easily further processed into new and innovative final products. And this is bringing diversity and opportunities for businesses to differentiate themselves in what has become a very crowded marketplace. Looking now at some of the innovations that are going on, we could have chosen endless examples because there's so much happening in this sector. So we've just had to choose some of the ones that maybe we thought may be of interest to you. There are activities going on in plants which have not necessarily traditionally been associated as a source of protein, but are now being developed as a protein option. So from Sweden, we see this potato-based milk. The brand Doug was created in collaboration with the University of Lund. In the UK, we have Naylor's Farm, who are one of Europe's biggest growers of cabbage, and they have applied for planning permission to build a new site to extract protein from cabbages. The American brand Spudsy is now marketing their sweet potato-based snacks in Europe and have a protein claim on the pack. Even if it is only 4 grams per pack, they obviously feel that it's worth shouting about. And the marketing behind these brands highlights another important trend, which is that being plant-based on its own is no longer enough to attract customers. The brands are emphasizing their environmental and free from credentials alongside their plant-based protein. Looking at meat alternatives, we're seeing that both dedicated plant-based and traditional meat companies around the world are bringing new formats of meat alternatives to market. We know there's a well-worn path of launching of burgers and meatballs and formed steaks, minces, but we can now see them in a much wider range of flavors and formats. And pulses and legumes are getting a marketing facelift, and we're also seeing more options for people who want to create their own recipes, such as stir-fry strips and cubes, and pushing into other meal occasions with breakfast scrambles and bacon rasher alternatives. New proteins like lupin are referring to familiar formats such as hummus and dips to bring customers with them into these new proteins. And we're seeing a lot of innovation in products which are created from waste or byproducts, and by preventing these going to waste, are being positioned to the consumers as environmentally positive choices. So some products that might previously have been marketed as vegetarian, you will have seen them reformulating and repositioning to make vegan claims. Established meat snack brands are launching plant-based variants, and the well-known Quorn brand is moving into ready-to-eat and on-the-go categories. Meat but from plants is the claim from Redefined Meat brand, who are advertising whole muscle cuts is coming soon. And mushrooms are being highlighted as satisfying and meaty tasting plant alternatives. So we can see this diversification of eating occasion, market positioning, marketing positioning, as well as product innovation. I mentioned earlier about fish, and this is one of the areas where we've seen a lot of new products entering the market over the last 18 months. And the emphasis, as I mentioned, is shifting from formed and coated products. Although these continue to be popular, they're being joined by plant-based options which mimic the appearance, taste, and texture of sliced and portioned fish and seafood such as prawns. And this is driving new usage occasions such as sushi and salads. Delicious, for example, feature vegan salmon and tuna, while Nestle are marketing plant-based shrimp or prawns, as we call them in the UK, in a range of products. Turning now to dairy, we saw on the figures earlier that the plant-based milk market is very well established, and that we've got these newcomers such as the potato milk from Doug. But now the pace of innovation is increasing substantially within cheese, yogurt, ice cream, and dessert sectors. Ben & Jerry's are shifting plant-based to their so-called core range, and Yogurtland, who have 250 locations in the USA, are launching oat-based yogurts this year. And vegan cheese is now presenting itself in easy-to-use formats, such as ready grated and spreadable, including these new ranges from flax and kale in Spain. So we can also see increasingly sophisticated desserts entering the vegan market. Looking at eggs now, this has been an area where innovation might be considered to have lagged behind other dairy sectors, but new easy-to-use products are being introduced around the world, from substrates including aquafaba from chickpea production and nutritional yeast. Brands such as Just Egg, Veg, and Oggs are investing and marketing their ranges to establish brand loyalty. And the brand Wunder Egg have patent pending for their plant-based hard-boiled egg substitute. Now, you might wonder why I'm mentioning carbs in a webinar about protein. Well, it's because carbs are being increasingly marketed, which are enriched with plant-based proteins, from hemp flours, which are boasting 25% protein contents, to Austria's Complete Protein bread brand. Pushing into new meal occasions, we have products such as super seeds as toppers for salads, and then handheld snack category. There's an overwhelming range of new bars, cakes, biscuits, and savoury snacks. There's too many really to look at, and there's a wide diversity coming in all the markets across Europe. So we see this strong, almost exponential growth in plant-based foods in general, and protein in particular, that has been having over the last 18 months. But in recent months, we are hearing rumblings that the market may not be set for this continued expansion, as many have predicted. And we're just going to have a look now at a few of the possibly inhibiting factors. So this concern has been expressed particularly in the United States, where sales of plant-based foods rocketed 45% between 2019 and 2020. But in the latter half of last year, sales started to slow, and they even fell in some market sectors. For example, according to retail data organization SPINS, sales of vegan meat alternatives in America actually fell 1.6% in the 6 months up to last October. Questions are now being asked as to whether the enthusiastic attention of the media is actually greater than the true consumer demand, and whether interest for all things plant-based may turn out to be a temporary craze, which will fade as the novelty wears off. There is also concern being expressed that with more and more brands and supermarket-owned label products being launched, consumers are simply overwhelmed by too much choice. In the end, this could lead to inertia and them not buying anything within the sector and drifting back to other meat-based proteins with which they're familiar and have grown up with. Ultimately, there is the question whether the market will prove large enough for all the businesses who wish to operate within it to find an acceptable level of sales. Throughout our work, moving on now, Thank you. Throughout all our work here on the AHFES project, we've always stressed, however healthy or well marketed your product, if it doesn't taste good, it doesn't look good, it doesn't have the texture and aroma that consumers expect and enjoy, the product will fail. Nobody keeps buying a product that they find disappointing. Equally, consumers need to be able to afford to include plant-based foods in their weekly shopping baskets, and many are considered to be relatively expensive compared to meat products. There are also concerns that plant-based proteins fail to provide the eating enjoyment they need at prices the market will stand. This will mean a lack of repeat purchases. Another increasing threat being highlighted is that many plant-based products have been developed with long ingredients lists, which often include many functional ingredients that consumers are not familiar with and which they may perceive to be artificial. The meat industry is taking every opportunity they can to highlight this fact. And commentators in the media are also challenging the simplicity of plant-based equals better than meat for the environment by pointing out that plant-based foods may have long supply chains from around the world and that significant processing steps erode or even negate any positive credentials. So for anyone active in this sector, these concerns will need to be addressed or explained if the longer term market is to continue to grow. However, despite these issues, if we look at the next slide, many critical factors are coming together. This is the consumer demand, innovation and investment, meaning that the market for plant-based food in some areas is forecast to grow further. For example, in economics predict that the European market will grow from 4.4 billion euro to 7.5 billion euro by 2025. But innovation will need to keep pace with demand for this to happen successfully, and research is expanding. Now, not all proteins are created equal, as Natalie has highlighted to us, and new plant proteins are brought to market, so they have to be investigated from both a nutritional and a functional point of view before they can be successfully used into recipes and marketed to consumers. Across the world, academic researchers and the food industry are exploring these new sources of plant proteins to understand what amino acids they offer to our diet. Some are revealed to be more digestible or easily absorbed, while others have better bioavailability, allowing the customer to benefit nutritionally from the quantity of protein they're consuming. To be useful in food and drink production, product developers need to fully understand which of the new proteins can achieve the physical and organoleptic attributes they are looking for, and whether they behave consistently during manufacturing and remain stable over shelf life. And one key trend that Natalie mentioned is for manufacturers to be combining proteins from different sources along with their other ingredients in order to achieve the complete nutritional profile and product characteristics that they're looking for. So these are some of the questions you might want to ask yourself when choosing your protein. As you explore plant-based protein options, you need to familiarize yourself with the nature of the protein and how it's going to perform. For brands looking to be credible in the health, food and drinks sector, nutrition will be a key focus, and this should be based on the protein needs and desires of your particular target audience. And this will vary by their life stage and their lifestyles. But equally, you want to know how you can achieve the taste, aroma, text and appearance that you and your consumer have been revealed by your consumer research that's what they're looking for. And then it has to be affordable. It has to be available in the minimum order quantities that suit your production volumes and the shelf life of the product. All your products obviously have to be food safe and free from risks of food fraud and be something that you can rely on to be consistent from batch to batch and not subject to variations based on the season or where the plants are harvested. And of course, it has to be legal to use it within your food and drink product and thinking about novel food. Ultimately, you need to be confident that your consumers will be accepting and ideally enthusiastic about this new protein offer. Now I'm going to hand back to Natalie to take us through insects as a protein source.
Thank you very much. So insects is quite a new and emerging, it's quite an exciting area. Again, it kind of really divides people depending on whether they think it's a good alternative or whether they still have that slight bit of disgust. But there is an awful lot of research going into it at the moment. The reason that insects have become such a big business that we're looking into is that they hold a high nutritional value. And also as the population is growing and is forecast to be an extra 2 billion people on the planet, it is foreseen that the insects could be part of the solution. Not to say that everyone will be eating it, but it could be something that people are going to tap into. There is a huge growth, and we're seeing a massive growth at the minute. And this is generally because it has been taken off and it has been given novel food status within the EU, within the UK. I'll come on to that in a moment. Big giants such as Cargill and McDonald's are also testing the waters, even though it's still very preliminary. They are looking at areas. Doritos were one of the first people going back a couple of years ago, back in 2018, to say that they were going to make insect-based Dorito chips. And again, still to see those yet. On to the next slide. So just to show you on here, we're really kind of seeing that the consumers that are reaching it are really increasing. However, some surveys that we're going to come on to in a moment will actually show that there's still a big sector of people that aren't aware that insect is a viable protein and actually could be helpful and safe for people to eat. And here we're really seeing the tonnage of the protein source and of the insect source. And whilst whole insects could be, again, quite a turn off to people, as they're not necessarily the most appealing to see, things like powder and insect ingredients are really progressing, and the great applications. Again, once you kind of take the isolate protein or whatever constituents you want from the insect powder and isolate it, it then has quite a high functionality. And so far, working with the ValuSect program, which is looking at a read of all different sorts of projects and different research, it's really showing that powdered insects have high functionality and high taste quality as well, which is quite surprising to people. On to the next slide. So why would you go for an insect protein? Well, actually, insects to date, so again, the research is still emerging, and it's very similar to kind of gut health, where we were seeing it, and then we see quite a lot of research emerging in 2020 and beyond. The insect market is really developing a lot of research at the moment, and we're going to start seeing a lot more. So again, if you are researching any, or you want to look for any papers, do look for about 2020 onwards, so you will find them on insects. There's a really high level of essential amino acids. So going back to the beginning when I was saying about the different amino acids that we need. Lysine in particular is really important to stimulate that muscle protein synthesis. And to date, again, different types of insects have shown to have very high levels of lysine. Within the ValuSect project, we're particularly looking at mealworms, crickets, and grasshoppers. But again, there are more different insects that could be looked at. Again, what I'm putting on here is generally due to those 3 different types. There is a high level of fibre, and the fibre can be taken from the chitin that we see as the exoskeleton. And really interestingly, on the vitamin and mineral side of it, if you feed crickets, carrots, for example, you see a really high level of beta-carotene increased vitamin A. So actually, you could think you could manipulate the different vitamins within that insect powder, depending on what the feed is. And interestingly, they can eat waste. So again, it would have to be credible food quality waste, but they can be eating, say, potato peelings, they could be eating the waste from carrots, etc. So again, a really great way of having a really great circular economy. Very high in minerals, and I'll come on to those in a minute, and very high in essential fatty acids. So as a nation, and generally across the globe, we're generally under-consuming our omega-3 and omega-6 fatty acids, or especially omega-3 fatty acids, which if we're not eating enough, we do see high levels of inflammation. So again, there is some really beneficial, credible reasons to be eating insects if people get past that kind of slight to begin with. On to the next slide. So just to show on here, again, this was touching on a few different types of insects, other than what we're talking about, the crickets, mealworms, and grasshoppers. But when you compare this to beef and fish and shellfish, you're really seeing that it's very similar within the protein within it. So it was a very niche market. Again, we were quite open to it, but now it's beginning to become much, much more. Lovely. So when we're looking here on the sustainability side of it, so again, some of these are quite new, and we are looking for a little bit more credible results within the sustainability, but it is very credible to assume that there's much less water that's required. So long as it's a moist environment, or even the feed has a slight moisture content, the insects don't actually require any further water. Also, when we're looking at the greenhouse gas emissions, they're significantly decreased compared to livestock farming. So again, if you're looking at the sustainability aspect, they really do have great appeal. So as I touched on earlier, there's always a little bit of a clink in the armour, and here we've got the legislation. So within the EU, there was it was all given that whole insects could be used as ingredients as well as a novel food. That all went through nice and swimmingly, and we're seeing a lot of projects, a lot of research now developing, and foods coming out as a result. However, when the UK came out of the European Union, the novel food application for authorisation that was required had not been ticked off. So something happened somewhere. And so actually in the UK at the moment, you would need to submit a new novel food dossier if you are looking to sell insect protein. It is foreseen that it is going to go ahead, and we don't necessarily think that it's going to be stopped. But again, it does mean there'll be a delay. So again, lots of information at the moment that's on the website. If you'd like any more information on that, please do get in contact and we can do a little bit more. So when we're looking at investments, we're seeing that there's a huge amount of investment in much smaller companies. But again, as you can imagine, it's still quite very niche. It's still very new, so it's growing quite a rapid rate. And so the investment is high. And we're seeing a big development of the small to micro-sized companies that are seeing the largest CleanTech at the moment. And again, looking at that from a ValuSect side of it, that's where we're really seeing the biggest amount of kind of the small to medium-sized companies. So with functionality, again, there seems to be a lot of functionality when we're looking at nutritional, digestibility, etc. But again, the things that are coming out that are really important here are the foaming and emulsifying properties. So this could be really great when you're making it into different bars, different cakes. You could be using it into say, protein powders, and the solubility is very high as well. So it makes it nice and appealing if you're looking for a ready to drink, or if you're looking for a protein enhanced liquid. Again, it won't have that clumping, so very appealing to the consumer, because texture is really important. So a huge range of different products. Again, I could have selected lots and lots of them, but I've selected these ones in particularly just because they do show there's a slight difference from what the packaging is looking at. Really looking very appealing, very much on trends. We're seeing here ones with flowers on. We're seeing different ones actually as part of a gift pack. There was a Valentine's gift you could buy earlier this year with insects within it. And again, kind of having the wine and the beer there, really showing it as an alternative pub grub. So instead of having perhaps a pork scratching or peanuts, you could have insects instead. Just one thing to note on there, whilst I'm talking about peanuts, is that there is an allergen concern. So you need to make sure that those people that have any shellfish allergies may also be allergic to insects. So again, that's just a consideration if you are looking to incorporate insect protein into your products. It will need analysis there. Part of the ValuSect survey, part of ValuSect, we've been doing a survey. We've been talking to lots of different people and really gathering the information. So as I said, this is still a niche and kind of growing area, which makes it very exciting. But from this, we were just asking whether people had tried insect foods. Not necessarily surprisingly, the majority hadn't. On to the next slide. And on this one, they were seeing if they've actually even seen them. And what I thought was quite interesting is that the majority of the survey participants haven't even seen insect proteins. They'd heard of them, but had not tried them at all or seen them on sale. And when they were looking at those people that had seen them, they were looking at where they had been kind of viewing these. And predominantly it was online or street food vendors. And a lot of that was coming from people that perhaps been on holiday and they were seeing it from Asia or from those countries where insects have been part of their cuisine or part of their culture for many, many years. So on this one, we're looking kind of what would put you off, which I think is really interesting. So there's lots and lots of respondents here. But generally it was actually knowledge and the visual appearance. So generally we say that taste is at the forefront. If something doesn't taste good, people don't want it. It was high up, but it wasn't necessarily the highest respondent level. When we're looking at visual appearance, I think kind of various programs such as I'm a Celebrity, Get Me Out Here and all those other types of things perhaps haven't given insects the appeal that perhaps that they might gain in the future. So we were looking at kind of what would actually encourage consumption. So if people were to see these products, what would they like to see? And not really surprisingly, it was really kind of those key nutritional and health benefits people would like to see. They would like to see the taste and to be really positive, and they would like to see positive environmental credentials. Then everything else is kind of a little bit lower. So I think it's really key that if you are making insect-based products or you're going to incorporate insect proteins, that again, it does have a credible health claim and it does have some credible outcome to the consumer, as that seems to be good for you. So again, we're looking at when would you eat? And again, there's quite even across the board, apart from snacking. It really was kind of the snacking market, which I thought was quite interesting, where people would be kind of most open or be expecting to see the snacking market. But if we're looking at what's on sale at the moment, that's not particularly surprising. It's generally bars and protein products that we kind of have ready to drink, say after the gym type of thing. So again, it does seem that snacking will be at the forefront there for what the consumers are expecting. And again, what are they looking for it to offer? So generally, it'd be good nutritional properties. And again, it'd be high in omega-3, high in minerals, fatty acids and proteins. Also looking for positive health benefits from hair, nails and skin. And then it's kind of coming down slightly lower flavour, taste and positive credentials with environmental. So just a few, just a few kind of snippets that were coming from the overall from this is that generally people that were the general thing that put people off from eating it was the appearance and lack of knowledge. And if it could have taste and positive environmental benefits and health potentials, then it would generally persuade the consumers to eat more. Men were actually more likely to eat the insects than women, but I thought was quite interesting to kind of as a general. And the most common time for eating insects, as you said, was snacking moment. So again, perhaps kind of get people together and having a really talking point would be quite interesting for that one. Also, vegetarians and vegans consistently stated that they would not or never eat the insect proteins. I think it's quite interesting. So quite a lot of people are seeing insects as being that intermediate between meat and between plant-based, so live creatures, but they kind of have that very high sustainability credential. But it's the flexitarians, the climatarians, reductarians, which really are those that are consistently saying that they would be really interested in eating insects because of the environmental credentials. And on to the algae. So I'm going to just whip through a little bit of the algae and seaweed and sea crops. So again, algae is a slightly different kind of way of looking at it. It's still a plant-based protein, but again, very much different, a marine kind of culture. We're seeing that over the last few years, algae and algae-based products or seaweed-based products have absolutely grown. You're seeing all sorts of things. The mineral and vitamin content within algae is absolutely superb. So again, no surprise why we're seeing that kind of really grow. The statistics where it's going to come up to kind of by 2027 is anticipated to reach mainly the health and the well-being market, and that's looking at about 11.9 million US. This is actually seen to grow a little bit quicker, but again, there's not particularly a credible amount that's been put with it, but it's certainly the wellness and the health market that's driving that. So again, just kind of touching again onto the nutritional context, and it does depend on the ecology, season and the species of what the nutritional benefits are within the seaweed. But we're looking at about a 70% protein content of isolated protein, or if you're looking at a whole food, it's about 35% protein on average. So again, it does really differ dependent on the species that you're going for. But not only is it very high in protein, it's high in carbohydrates, high in fibre, and very low in sugar. So making it a very appealing addition, whether it's a standalone food or whether it's an additive or an ingredient to existing products. So again, we've generally kind of seen it as spirulina powder. I don't know if you remember, kind of going back many, many years. I remember when I first got into health and fitness, and you'd get these kind of green sludgy drinks. And thankfully, it's come a long way since then. But again, it still is the spirulina powders, the chlorella that we're seeing particularly high. Within the nutritional makeup, there's a lot of nutrients that are very good at boosting collagen production. So again, it's very, very appealing to the market right now. And it requires much lower land requirements and much higher nutrient values to terrestrial plants. And interestingly, most land-based plants are low in lysine, amino acid lysine, but algae and seaweed are very high in lysine. So again, it's got a slightly better amino acid profile compared to terrestrial plants. So again, wide range of different products that you can get from here. And the great appeal is because it's actually low in salt, but it has a salty flavour, but it's very high in potassium. So all of those essential nutrients that are required for all of our health, but generally the UK and the European population is very low in, these products can really help and top up in a very meaningful way. There's a lot of research now that's come from seaweed, and particularly looking to gut health as well. So it really ticks all of those appealing sectors right now and trends from gut health to protein. On to the next slide. So again, lots of different areas to go through. I'm surprised that we're not going to be seeing within yogurts. I think that there's a kefir that's coming out at the moment. There's a fermented milk alternative that could be quite interesting that's going to be coming out. Lots of different salt alternatives. That's really what's flooding the market at the moment. It's kind of those salt alternatives that you can then season your products with. We can also use them as an agricultural biostimulant, so perhaps not for human consumption, but to help grow some of our other plants, and are great for a circular economy. So you can use wastewater, for example, from dairy industry, and then start growing algae within tubes. So it's a great way of making this a really wholesome circular economy and adding value to products. So I'm going to hand back over to Ali to look at them CleanTech based proteins.
Thank you very much, Natalie. I won't dwell on this slide, but I think most of the people here will be understanding the motivations that are behind CleanTech, and we're going to look at two areas of it, which are the cell proteins and fermented proteins. The first, cell proteins, has also been called clean meat or clean fish. The second discipline is talking about new techniques of fermentation. So we've just got some examples to share with you here. So we have the Dutch company Mooster Meats, which is co-led by Dr. Mark Post, who pioneered the first ever laboratory-grown burger out of Maastricht University. And he has put in place several rounds of multi-million-dollar funding. And the past 2 years has been focusing on overcoming the major hurdle of producing their beef at a price that the market will withstand. And then we've got San Francisco company, Just Eat, who are one step ahead of Mooster Meats in the respect of seeking regulatory approval, as they expect. They obtained this in Singapore in December of 2020, and a cell-cultivated chicken protein is now being sold in selected restaurants out there. And this took a considerable amount of effort over 3 years, 20 production runs, 1,200 litre bioreactors. So you can have an understanding of the sort of barriers of research that are in place to get this regulatory approval. Nevertheless, if we move on to the next slide, we can see that businesses for cell-based agriculture are being set up all over the world, with a lead in North America and Europe. But large nations such as the US and China are being joined by smaller countries. Now, these countries may lack land for farming, or their climatic conditions do not favour wide-scale traditional agriculture. And these countries are proactively seeking to reduce their dependence on food imports and improve this food security of their population in ways that are environmentally advantageous. So looking now, we can see examples in Qatar, who have announced an intention to imminently approve self-based meat production in their free trade zones. And then we've got Good Meat, which is a subsidiary of the American company Just Eat, Eat Just, setting up production sites to sell into the Middle East and Africa. And this is part of a £170 million investment plan. Israel is very active in the area, with a number of companies in the cell meat sector who've been successful in securing funding to scale up and try and create affordable cell-based meat proteins, which will compete on all organoleptic and commercial footings with traditionally farmed products. Future Meat, Super Meat, Elf Farms are all based in Israel. And in San Francisco, the thinking is that will be the first of the American authorities, which will give approval within the next 18 months, and that it may well actually be cell fish that was approved, such as the cell salmon from this company Wildtype. Whereas across on the East Coast in Raleigh, North Carolina, you have Perlita working on doing cell-based oysters, and they've received substantial amounts of funding. In China, Joe's Future Food and Celex are among a number of cell-based meat companies who are receiving hundreds of millions of dollars of financial backing, in response in no small part to the food security issues that were revealed when swine flu swept through the herds of pigs, which left China in particular exposed, as around half of all the global pork production is used in China. And interest is also moving beyond meat and fish into new areas such as dairy. So you have this Israeli company Wilk, who have been backed by Coca-Cola, who are bringing cell-based animal and human breast milks to market, and Turtle Tree Labs from Singapore, targeting both meat and dairy self-based products with their vision of a kinder, healthier, affordable, sustainable production. So it will be interesting to see how this sector evolves and whether the technology can get to the point where cell meat can be produced at a price to generate a meaningfully sized market that will justify all the investment, not only in manufacturing facilities, but improving food safety and getting regulatory approval, and also marketing the products to general consumers. Now let's look at the second area of cellular agriculture, which is now attracting a lot of attention, and this is fermented products. So I won't dwell on this, but I mean, fermented products have been around the world, have been part of the daily diet, and using either aerobic or anaerobic conditions, and enzymes have been widely used to create insulin for diabetes sufferers, used in the food industry, such as in bakery and dairy products. So the trend moved on then to biomass fermentation, which was used for biofuels, and then became using the high protein content and the rapid growth of microorganisms to efficiently make large amounts of protein-rich foods. And certainly here in the UK, corn would be one of the leaders in this area. However, in the last few years, fermentation has come back into the spotlight with the processes that are called precision fermentation. If we could just have the next slide. Where fermentation vessels are used to ferment the desired product. Proteins are harvested from host organisms and purified to produce proteins which mimic animal, fish, or plant proteins in their functional characteristics, and also their taste and texture and their nutritional profiles. And the so-called clean meat, these new precision fermentation processes also require considerable capital investment to create production facilities suitable for producing the protein. And in a recent Food Matters Live webinar, it was stated that some $600 million have been invested in 2020 into these new technologies, and that this rate of investment is being maintained. Many businesses in the sector are startups, so they're also, alongside building their production capabilities, they're having to undergo rigorous food safety testing to produce food safe products, and to bring the legislative frameworks around the world to consider that these proteins are being appropriately regulated for consumer safety. So just a quick look at some of these areas. One of the key areas of focus is dairy, with a number of startups raising funds to scale up. So in January of this year, Israeli company Remilk announced a $120 million funding for their dairy identical fermented products. And then we've got new companies such as Change Foods, Better Dairy, Formo, and New Culture positioning themselves in the precision fermentation as being the future of dairy, which will radically remove the negative impacts of traditional dairy on the environment and animal welfare. Moving on, Perfect Day in the USA has raised over $750 million and is being called the unicorn company of the sector, worth some $1.5 billion. And their animal-free dairy isn't cultivated from animal cells, but their end product is identical to its animal version, and it's grown through a process that involves genetically modified microflora. They're then using this technology to create products that they sell business to business, and end products such as ice cream, yogurts, and sports nutrition are coming out of these raw materials. Even large multinationals such as General Mills, who use the Perfect Day powder in their bold culture cream cheese. Moving on to eggs, we have Clara Foods, who are now called Every. They're again an ingredients company specialised in animal-free egg proteins through precision fermentation. And they also sell an animal-free pepsin product, and they're marketing egg white business to business. They're sort of highlighting their busy R&D pipeline to create animal-free ingredients for use in bakery and as a protein boost for food and beverages. Having started business as a company called Sustainable Bioproducts, this company have now taken the much more foodie and consumer-friendly name of Nature's Find. They are fermenting protein grown in the geothermal springs of Yellowstone Park's ancient volcano, would you believe? And they've raised several rounds of funding, including from Danone, and like most others, they're positioning themselves as dairy and meat alternatives, but which only use a fraction of the land and water required in traditional agriculture. But I suppose one of the critical things is how a consumer is going to attract these new technologies. And the German startup Formo conducted research last year. This company have raised over $50 million to focus on precision fermentation of dairy. And they looked at consumers in the UK, Germany, Singapore, and America. And this year they have shared these insights, and it makes them interesting reading. So the report highlights that consumers are becoming more aware of environmental and animal welfare issues, but are still very suspicious of technical innovation that make their food seem unnatural. They're looking for products that offer good health outcomes, but reject foods that they feel have been tampered with by faceless corporations who are purely motivated by profit. And they found the name alternative dairy resonated the best with consumers, and that it was not a good idea to reference biotech or more science-sounding names, as consumers were not interested and actually were actively put off by these. So, as you might expect, the traditional dairy sector is challenging the validity of the claims for precision fermentation, that they can truly replicate animal-based dairy products. And these are just some of the areas that they're raising. And as Natalie mentioned around insects, there are issues around allergens. And though with this debate about whether these products would be considered vegan, they are animal-free. But they're not plant-based. So would there be a situation where consumers might feel confused or even misled? So just to finish on something which we were saying to my colleagues this morning is a bit like a science fiction movie. Our final fermented food example is Solar Foods from Finland, who are pioneering making protein out of thin air. They're seeking novel food approval in the EU and UK for their product Soline, which is an animal-free protein, a yellow powder that you can put into foods, make meat alternatives, noodles, ice cream, egg replacers. And the Finnish government have given them planning permission for a wind-powered production plant, and they've been raising the funding to start commercial production next year. So they're combining hydropower with fermentation, and the microorganisms, are being generated, fed nutrients, including calcium and phosphagen and other minerals, which plants would normally get from the soil. So the result of their unique process is that they've got a neutral tasting powder, which is 60 to 70% protein. And the yellow colour is due to the content of beta carotene, which is found widely in carrots and other vegetables. And the company have even come to the attention of NASA's Deep Space Challenge. They're through phase 1 of the challenge, which is looking to seek viable ways to create food in space and on human settlements in other planets. So finally, much like the founders of Solar Foods, who have publicly stated that they can see that the future is going to be in collaboration. It's going to be about bringing together perhaps firms who are working in the fully cultivated, cell-based agriculture, the plant-based area, and that the future will be finding hybrid solutions rather than there being a one silver bullet, if you like, from one particular area. So just to conclude, we hope that the webinar has provided you with an update in what's happening across the protein sector, with plenty of food for thought as how markets are evolving. And we can see that it's not all about technical challenges that innovators are facing, but also about consumer opinion, political agendas, the availability of investment funding. All of these factors have a huge role to play in the future if these alternative proteins are going to come mainstream. And proving that the foods are safe and satisfying regulators will be crucial to bringing products to market. But most critical of all is whether all of this can be achieved at prices that make the protein affordable in highly competitive mass market foods. And ultimately, will they change the face of food production as we know it? So whatever you choose to do with the information for today's webinar, don't forget that the AHFES project has a whole range of services, and particularly a programme of training, with looking at a whole host of topics relevant to businesses in the healthy food and drink sector. And we're continuing to add resources over the next 3 months. So if you're an SME in an AHFES country you're innovating in healthy food and drink, you can dip into our training and choose topics, everything from legal labelling to defining the quality attributes of your product, benchmarking, product development, factory trials. Just let your local AHFES partner know you would like to sign up and join the businesses who are already benefiting from the AHFES training to upskill their work, their teams. So it's been a pleasure for Natalie and myself to welcome you to the webinar, and we hope very much that you have enjoyed what we've had to share with you today.
Thank you, everyone. I think we have had some questions that we've answered along the way. If there's anybody who has any other sort of final questions, please feel free. Otherwise, we'll be closing the webinar now. So I'll just give it a minute or so to see if anything comes through on the questions. No, I don't think so. And I can see people are leaving. So thank you very much. And hope everybody has a very good day.
Thank you.
Thank you.